या वीणा वरदंड मंडितकरा या श्वेत पद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युत शंकर प्रभृतिवि देवहि सदा वंदिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निशेष जाड्यापहा. A very good afternoon to one and all present on this virtual platform in which Amity School of Liberal Arts has organized a webinar today titling Principles and Practices in Humanities Research. And for this webinar, our today's resource person is a renowned linguist, Professor Uday Narayan Singh, Dean, Faculty of Arts, Amity University, Haryana. Before the session begins, I would like to request Professor Sanjay Kumar Jha, Director, Amity School of Liberal Arts, Amity University, Haryana, to deliver the welcome address and opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Supriya. I hope my voice is audible.
Yes, sir.
With greetings of the day, let me at the outset extend a very warm welcome to all of you in the pursuit of its academic excellence. Today, Amity School of Liberal Arts has organized this webinar on principles and practices in humanities research. Since knowledge is transitional, the rationale behind organizing this webinar or similar webinars in coming days is to keep our research scholars informed of the ongoing development in humanities research. When I say knowledge is transitional, it reminds me of the research work of the most famous linguist. You must have understood I am talking of Noam Chomsky, who is not only the most famous linguist, but also a great philosopher, a great mathematician, and a great protester of American policy. He is still alive and he is working at MIT, USA. Chomsky wrote his first book called Syntactic Structures in 1957, in which he discussed three components of language. His theory revolutionized the field of linguistics. But the same Chomsky wrote his second book in 1965, in which he disproved to much extent what he said in 1957. Thereafter, every 2 or 3 years, Chomsky kept on modifying his linguistic theories. And even today, he modifies his own linguistic theory. Now, if you ask me why Chomsky does so, an obvious reason is he wanted to make his linguistic theory more comprehensive or more universal. So what we learn from Chomsky's attempts to modify his own linguistic theories is we cannot stagnate on one idea or hypothesis forever, because knowledge is transitional. So my first advice to our researchers is make your research findings more generalized, supported by both internal and external validity. Secondly, I request you to read. Although you list up more than 100 books I have seen under your references, but in reality, most of you do not read even 5 books properly. I'm sorry to say this. Dear researchers, if you will not study, if you will not read, or if you don't do adequate and appropriate literature review, you will not only fail to identify the research gap, but will also end up doing a research that has already been done by others. Although our researchers undergo a coursework of 4 or 5 months to understand essentials of research, but what I have felt personally is our scholars remain deprived of, understanding many vital concepts and executing them in their actual research. And this is why I have decided to have a series of expert lectures every fortnight on research methodology for our PhD, master, and undergraduate level researchers. In this direction, today we have assembled on this virtual platform not only to impart knowledge of doing a good research, but also to take actual problems that our researchers have been facing while doing their research. And I feel happy to let you know that in today's webinar, we have with us Professor Uday Narayan Singh as the Chief Resource Person who will reflect on principles and practices used in humanities research in the present scenario. And for his intellectual presence, let's welcome Professor Uday Narayan Singh with a huge round of digital applause, please. Professor Singh, we are truly privileged to have you with us today. Coming to the objectives of this webinar, it goes without saying that research has undergone unprecedented change in recent years in many ways, as we have shifted our attention from conceptualization to empiricity, from topicality to inter and multidisciplinarity. Most of the social problems are being defined today in a technical or scientific way. In today's techno-scientific and neoliberal age, very few researchers are privileged to participate in social debates in practical terms. And the reason of all these is we are still carrying the age-old 20th century status quo in the 21st century as well. The time is to think out of the box. The time is to bring in novelty in our perceptions. With new education policy almost in effect, I think we also need to devise a new model of knowledge or new model of research for researchers in humanities. Today, people are more interested in relevance of your research. So the point here is we need to look at our research from utilitarian perspectives with concrete evidence. With these words, now I would like to give the floor to Professor Uday Narayan Singh to enlighten us on new dimensions of research. Over to Dr. Supriya.
Ma'am, you are muted. Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful remarks on important aspect of research. Before we start today's thematic session, this is to announce that all the participants should post their questions in the chat box, and all the questions will be taken during interactive session. Now, I would like to invite Professor Uday Narayan Singh to reflect on the important themes of principles and practices in humanities research. Professor Uday Narayan Singh, Dean, Faculty of Arts, MIT University, Haryana, was the director of Center Institute of Languages, Mysore. Besides being an internationally renowned linguist, Professor Singh published 8 books of poems, 12 plays, 6 books of literary essays, a short story collection, and numerous translations. With 58 books and over 200 academic papers, he received the coveted Sahitya Academy Award 2017 for his anthology of Maithili poems, Jahlak Diary. He lectured in Andorra, Australia, Bangladesh, Belgium, China, France, Germany, Italy, Malaysia, Mauritius, Nepal, Pakistan, Russia, Singapore, Spain, Sweden, Thailand, and USA, and received many other awards and honors. Now, I request him to take the floor for today's thematic session.
Well, thank you, Supriya, for a very generous introduction. And let me go back to Professor Sanjay Jha's comments on Chomsky, who is still working. Even though he has left MIT, he is now in University of Arizona in Tucson. But Tucson, as you know, has a very good linguistics department. Andrew Carney is the head there, his own PhD students. So, but then point is, he is not only working on language, he also works in psychology, he works in political science, he works on so many areas of humanities. And that is something which is interesting, that you can begin from somewhere, but you can reach in so many other places. So that's a very important point that I would like to mention here. Now, we all know, not to be disheartened, Chomsky had submitted his initial book, which was the 7th chapter of his thesis. Syntactic structures was part of his book, Logical Structure of Human Language, and Logical Structure of Human Language was promptly rejected by the publishers in 1955. But then he said, all right, let me cull out a chapter, 7th chapter, it's called Syntactic Structures. And he sent again to another publisher. And finally, MIT Press agreed to bring it out. And that's how a whole new revolution started in the area of not only linguistics, but humanities in general. So let me talk about many of these issues. I'm not going to talk about only linguistics. I'm going to talk about humanities in a very general manner. And I hope you will enjoy this presentation. Now, whenever I discuss the issue of what to study or what to work on in the field of humanities, I'm always reminded of this basic question: who is human? What is human? And what is human in humanities? Now, some of you may like to rephrase or find synonyms, and you would like to say perhaps being human is opposite to being divine, opposite to being vulnerable, fallible, ethological. Now, it looks like failure and vulnerability are somehow associated with human fate. But if man is a civilized anthropomorphic animal, why should we fail? That's a question. Is there a writing on the wall that our ideas, beliefs, concepts, theories, even explanations are all dispensable, all open to question? There is a hint which has been given by Dr. Sanjay Jha as he introduced the topic. I think you should remember that. Now, does the weakness of being human lie in our conditions? This is something which is important. And those of you who have studied Chomsky or who have actually known about Chomskyan variety of humanities would remember that one of the things he had said, which is basically a Kuhnian idea, is that unless you make your theory falsifiable, unless you make your theory vulnerable, fallible, that's not theory at all. That's no theory at all. You must stick out your neck, take the risk, and say things which could be proven wrong by somebody else, another researcher down the line. So what is this condition we are talking about? And many would argue the focus of humanities has always been on the human condition, totality of the experience of being human, about which Rabindranath Tagore had so much concern. Now, we know that ancient classics, rhetoric, poetry, forms of various arts, all come under litera humanoir, as against litera divini. Interesting dilemma. The view is human and non-divine, but the object of our view may deal with divinity. We don't know. It could be. Now here, numerous questions will arise, which may seem trivial or even frivolous to our colleagues in hard sciences and other areas. But as students of humanities, we shouldn't be ashamed to ask these questions. I'll give you some examples. Take, for instance, the issue of how objective could any view or reading or analysis be? Can you be really objective, completely objective? What is the nature of contrast between being and becoming? Or what is the basis of our existence? Seeking answers to questions like, why were I born? Why am I here? Where will I go when I die? Remember, Lord Buddha began with these questions and sought them, answers to them, and he went out of home, in search of answers to many of these questions. There have been long human struggle to find answers to many, many vexed questions. Fact is that we can ask these questions. That is important. The fact that we can ask these will define humanities and human conditions. Now, what is it that we are talking about? The human condition when we talk about. Traditionally, we in humanities explore the human struggle to understand our relationships. Now, this is very crucial. Those of you who are into hardcore language teaching, foreign language teaching, linguistics, would remember that in grammar, as we are dealing with, what is the prime is very important. Is noun a prime, verb a prime, adjective a prime, adverb a prime, or the relationship between noun and verb, that is subjecthood, objecthood, oblique objecthood, or various cases like ablative, nominative, dative, these are primes. So the point is, these relationships quite often in grammar as well as in human life are very important. Now, what are the relationships we are talking about here? Relationship between us and us, to ourselves, to others, to our past, to our future, to nature. All these relationships are very important. In other words, I'm talking about relationships with self, with the other, with time, and with space. Now, there has been a report on Commission on Humanities in USA, which has made an observation, which is a very important observation, that humanities offer clues, but never a complete answer to many, many fundamental questions with which man has been struggling. So this is a very important point that is being made here, that you may not have the complete truth. You may not have the complete answer to a query, but you have an answer. You have some bit of answer which takes your research little ahead of other people, little forward, so that others can catch you up and find out where you have made an error, where you have made a mistake, and improve upon it further. So it reveals how people have tried to make moral, spiritual, and intellectual sense of a world in which irrationality, despair, loneliness, death, these are all conspicuous, just as birth, friendship, hope, and reason. We know at the same time that a large part of this world cannot read or write. We are very fortunate that we are able to read and write, and we are able to have this session where you can see what I'm talking about, you can listen to me, see me, and also you can look at the what I'm exactly discussing. Now, only when we know what the written word can achieve, which we cannot otherwise achieve, we understand what the pains of the unwritten communities are. Because in our world today, the value is the value of the written word. Now, in humanities, which will also broadly cover various performing arts, paintings, all those 64 arts, a very important point is subject-object divide. Renaissance onwards, the focus has been on the view of self-defining instead of our being defined by others or our defining in terms of some larger cosmic order. So what it means is that we are the subjects. We picture the world as a set of natural objects. which we ourselves then observe and measure or modify to manipulate. And that's how writers progress. That's how painters and sculptors progress. The artists self-define, present or represent our time and space, where they feel like they also become their own creative subject, just as you now watch. Here Tagore is doing a self-portrait, he is drawing himself. So the task of us is, as verbal and visual artists, is deeply rooted largely in observing and commenting. Because once we put a figure or a mark on the canvas as an artist, it becomes possible not just to create a thing, but possible to offer it as a commentary of the creative entities. Because I can draw a cartoon, which will not only be a drawing, but it will tell a lot about the current scenario of the society and politics. So what is important in humanities? What is important is the license to question and the license to critique. It is this constant license to question that defines the concerns of humanities with the paradigm of civil societies. Look at the creative aspect of humanities. It says all culture, our speech, they reflect political and economic tensions of a multiistic space with the attendant divisiveness. If some writer says, well, I'm not into politics, I don't want to be in politics, I'm just a writer. That's not possible today. It has perhaps not been possible ever. They often threaten the unity of multinational states, thereby raising serious question marks over the modes and modes of management of plural spaces. Now, I know that political managers of a country may not like the authors, may not like the humanities, because it is in the nature of this culture of humanities to critique itself, its own base. So when you have Amartya Sen talking about the argumentative Indian and talking about those figures who made great impact on modern Indian history or Indian history ever, it's important that he is sticking his neck out and making a proposition which you may simply reject, you may accept, you may modify, you may argue about. This is very crucial. Through this critiquing, humanities tries to replace one set of order with another set of order. Remember, disruption is the key word here. At times, unprecedented intellectual violence will disrupt all the neat orders in our thought process. So, where are we? We are into definitions and we are into reflections. Let's look at definitions of humanities. Academic disciplines which study human condition but use methods that are largely analytic, critical, and at times even speculative, as distinguished from mainly empirical approaches in sciences or sometimes even social sciences like economics. I'm sure there could be other ways of looking at this broad field of humanities, but then somebody else will have some other conceptualization of the universal of knowledge. How do I reflect on these definitional ideas? We all try to look into the mirrors that each one of us, our creative fields, will provide. Remember, one of the most important points of Charles Hockett when he talks about design feature of human language is that one important feature of human language is reflexiveness. It's like we can hold a mirror to another mirror. Try holding a mirror onto another mirror and you'll find thousands and millions and billions of mirrors in the images, which means there are huge number of interpretations possible to anything that we do, anything that we write, anything that we say, and we reflect. So we all reflect on ourselves, speak about our concerns, discuss and debate our issues. What are those issues? Issues of dominance, issues of tolerance, issues of reining in some of our basic instincts. These are very crucial. Now, you might say that ultimately, sir, you are talking about ideas. True. A great idea does not always come very easily, but sometimes it starts in a very simple manner. We had Victor Hugo, who imagined a very peaceful United States of Europe in his writing, inspired by humanistic ideals. Now, we don't have the United States of Europe, but we have a European Union. We know that Hugo's dreams were shattered by the terrible world wars. But from the rubble of world war, few statesmen could see that there is a possibility of creating a lasting peace. But that will come only with eradication of poverty, hate, rivalry, and with a better commerce. So initially we had ECSC, the economic cooperation of Robert Schuman, the French foreign minister, who proposed this in 1950. Basically, initially to coordinate the coal and steel production. Later on, it became the EEC, European Economic Community, and then European Union with its whole parliament, European Parliament. So where shall we look for these ideas? This is just one example, but I'm sure there could be many other examples. So where do we look for ideas? That's a question, million-dollar question in humanities. What happens to the ideas in humanities? Interestingly, my view is that ideas cleave and cohere. They merge and emerge. They mend and bend until they form up as action points in some of our texts, which is why many of our texts later snowball into major revolutionary ideas. If a text of yesteryears like Ramayana or a text of yesteryears like Kamba Ramayana or Ramcharitmanas have snowballed into major religious theories and ideas in next few generations, that's what I am referring to. It could begin with a very secular work. It could begin with a religious text, doesn't matter. Much of what we are calling history here actually begins from man's discovery of the art of storytelling using the writing system. So from subscribing to an imagination that looks at the world as a product to thinking of the world as a process, this will happen only when our texts, oral or written, allow us to reconstruct the past. So somebody like A.K. Ramanujan, when he's working on 300 Ramayanas and comparing across various parts of Asia, not only India, to compare one with the other, what he's doing is he's trying to reconstruct what exactly made a great impact. How our known universe is turning into becoming from mere being. That's the challenge. So every text, even a very abstract one, means in the last analysis, ultimately an image. Now, this image is very important. Text analysis will show that original purpose of writing or deciphering of images or transcoding a two-dimensional code into a single dimension is present even today. You have read a book last week, suppose a novel last week. You may not remember all the nitty-gritties of that novel today, but you go around yourself with an image in mind, a powerful image that must have impressed you greatly. A lot of what is happening by way of novelty here would actually come from what we would call speculative fictions and similar writings, where the crucial question that they're asking is, what if? What if the world would have been different? What if the hero had taken X option rather than Y or Z options? The whole story would have been different. In an age of celebration of science and technology, humanities cannot stay away from scientificism. So many an artist, many a sculptor, many an author, they also dabble with, deal with science, trying to hold up mirror to what happens in other disciplines and other areas. I give you only one small example here from genetology, a painting done by Alexis Rockman. The painting is there on your screen, which is titled by Brian Jungen, Prototypes for a New Understanding. Now, Alexis Rockman says that my artworks are information-rich depictions of how our culture perceives and interacts with plants and animals, and the role culture plays in influencing the direction of natural history. So let's now look at one of the paintings of Alexis Rockman. Look at this painting called The Farm. Wide-angle view of the cultivated soybean field, constructed to be read from left to right. The artist says, in The Farm, I am interested in how the present and future look of things are influenced by a broad range of pressures: human consumption, aesthetics, domestication, and medical applications of all these. Read from left to right this painting. The sense of abstraction becomes very clear. Now, assume that different societies could also have similar goals and desires, similar ways of imaging and imagining. But that is something which is very important today. Comparative literature, comparative culture studies, comparative religion, and comparative philology. They are all very important and lively disciplines today. There are maybe possibilities that you will start on a different route, but you will end up reaching the same place. If that is possible, it might suggest that we are nearer to the definition of culture that is free of any randomness we are typically accused of. One may now conjecture that if the underlying ideas of different communities are similar, then the process of what I can call culturation should be able to give them a set of laws or directions, predictable paths through which these communities can progress to development. Now, obviously, if Russia is a developed country, and if China is a developed country, and if USA is a developed country, if UK is a developed country, and if France is a developed country, then these 5 different countries, they have traveled actually a completely different routes to reach where they have reached. This is crucial, that you can reach the same place from different angles. Now, humanities allows us these different viewpoints for the same reason. The paths of progress may not always be predictable, but there are many, many ways of achieving the same goal. What does it prove? What does it say to us? What it says to us is that there is a claim that each culture or language is unique. Look at this picture that I painted here. It may so seem that there are cultural universals. Fine, parallel to language universals. But then we must also admit that there are universal ways in which we define culture as a causative force, and there are ways to compare cultures across various parts. Now, here I would like to bring up a very interesting point, that there is always a play of order disorder in the course of time, in history, in human history. We are coming back to the point of disruption once again. After the violence and rupture, we see that a new set of cultural events and texts appear. As if these texts, these paintings, these songs, these films, this music, the purpose of these is to heal the rupture. The cycle of happenings and display of order and disorder are ingrained in the character of all cultural processes. And that's the case between the global and the local order. Now, what I was initially talking about in the context of Victor Hugo and ideas is that ideas are things which give you the culture. Culture is something which, if you cultivate, gives you entities. These entities can give rise to institutions. And once you have many institutions, it will give you many ideas. Do you see that we start with ideas, reach culture, entities, institutions, and go back to ideas, which means there is a very interesting cyclicality in the whole process. There are many institutions uh, which begin as ideas, but then they take deep roots and they give us further ideas. Democracy and law or constitution, for instance, could have started as ideas, but once they were adopted, they gave us institutions like parliament, like Supreme Court, like the fourth estate. And we can easily see that these parliament, Supreme Court, and the newspaper media, mass media, they are then churning out new ideas as to how to make a progress. So this brings us also in a very interesting way. Chomskyan syntax, Dr. Sanjay Jha has mentioned, one of the most important point about Chomskyan syntax is its generativity, its ability to generate, ability to recursively look at human language. This is also very interesting that in humanities, there is a very interesting foregrounding of languages, what is called logocentrism. Just as Sanskrit language was at the center of Indian civilization studies, humanities has this feature, typical feature of logocentrism. You cannot do sociology without reference to language. You cannot begin to work in anthropology without studying language. You cannot do anything to do with human psychology without even worrying about human language. If you look at this way, you find that there is a very interesting area which is called logocentrism. Importance of medium, importance of the media. Because if you want to rewrite history, in whose language are you going to write? Are you going to write in the language of the Dalits? Are you going to write in the language of the oppressors? Are you going to write in the language of the colonizers? Or are you going to write in the language of those who were once colonized? It will change the entire views of history. Are you going to write from the center, or are you going to write from the peripheries? Or is there something called a fuzziness, like central peripheries and peripheral centers? Now, what I am now saying, like central peripheries and peripheral centers, may sound very idealistic to some of you, but University of Saarbrücken has brought out a huge volume of central peripheries and peripheral centers, edited by Martina Schellhorn. Let's look at this volume. In fact, about 10 of us stayed in the same place in Europe. Girish Karnar and myself, we were in the same room, sharing the room. You know, this talking about the center and periphery. And a lot of people may think that in these discussions are becoming too abstract, but it's not really a question of abstractness. Question is, your point of view is very important. The emerging trend in our style of observation is the most important point. In humanities, Lakshman Khubchandani used to say, there are a lot of boundary crossings. A culture studies person is concerned with politics. A comparative literature person is worried about domination and subjugation. A philosopher is agitated about use and misuse of language. Linguist is divided on the question of logic. And a fine arts giant is concerned with both about the medium and about the message, leaving the performing arts specialists to worry about the finer details of the elocutionary acts. Remember the give and take in the dance. If you have the Radha and the Krishna dancing, you have Janmashtami coming here. Some of you may remember Birju Maharaj's performing arts presentations. There's very interesting give and take between the Gopinis and the Radha. between the Krishna and Radha. So there are finer details of the performing arts, which are all matter of elocutionary acts. These actually are scenarios which give us a very special nature of ontology. What do we mean by ontology? The way our universe is thought about. The way our universe is thought about has been best depicted by a painting. And some of you may remember or may know that this is something which is called the School of Athens painting. Let's look at this painting. In a while, we will look at the painting. Now, the beginning of humanities, 1250 is the beginning of humanities. There was a rediscovery of the total culture of classical antiquity in Verona and Padua. Literature, history, rhetoric, ethics, politics, all this came into the picture, and the debates have not yet stopped. In this context, there's a very interesting manifesto of humanism which came about. So before I show the painting of the School of Athens, let me talk about the Manifesto of Humanism. Pico della Mirandola wrote the Oration of the Dignity of Man, a kind of manifesto of humanism, where these words were shown as spoken by God, as if God is speaking to us. And God is saying, we have made you neither of heaven nor of earth, neither mortal nor immortal, so that the freedom of choice and with honor, as though the maker and molder of yourself, you may fashion yourself in whatever shape you shall prefer. You shall have the power out of thy soul's judgment to be reborn into higher forms which are divine. Very interesting, very powerful words. Difficult to say if great thinkers of the age of reason and the age of enlightenment were scientists or humanities people. But in an essay titled Science is Not Your Enemy, Steven Pinker has commented in this manner. Not only did many of them contribute to mathematics, many of them means many of the scholars of humanities contribute to mathematics, physics, and physiology, but all of them were avid theorists in the science of human nature. These thinkers, Descartes, Spinoza, Hobbes, Locke, Hume, Rousseau, Leibniz, Kant, Smith, and we can also add people like Roman Jakobson, Saussure, Chomsky. They are all the more remarkable for having crafted their ideas in the absence of a formal theory and empirical data. This was depicted in this painting by Raphael called School of Athens. Look at this painting very carefully. Now I'm not going to remove this painting until we discuss this and see it very carefully. Some of you may like to zoom in and make it a little bigger to see. Do we see Plato and Aristotle at the center of the painting, pointing towards the heavens and down to earth? One is pointing toward the heaven, another is pointing toward the earth. Where Plato is holding in his hand is Timaeus, describing a sophisticated treatment of space-time and change, including earth, which guided mathematical sciences. And what is Aristotle doing? Aristotle is carrying in his hand another book called Ethics, which he denied could be reduced to a mathematical science. You can't reduce ethics to mathematics. This scene also had the artist Raphael himself hiding behind them, and also great religious leaders like Zoroaster, famous for Zoroastrianism of Zend-Avesta fame of Iran. Among those identifiable in the painting are Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Pythagoras, Euclid, Ptolemy, Zoroaster, Raphael himself, Sodoma, and Diogenes. Among the two sculptures, you can see huge sculptures on the wall there. Among the two sculptures in the background, on the left is God Apollo, the god of light, archery, and music, holding a lyre. Lyre. The sculpture on the right is Athena, goddess of wisdom, in a Roman guise as Minerva. The building is in the shape of a Greek cross, which some suggested was to show a harmony between the pagan philosophy and the Christian ideology. Now here, in each of the four circles, Raphael made an allegorical figure to point the significance of scene beneath, towards which it turns. For the first, he had painted philosophy, astrology, geometry, and poetry, all of them agreeing with theology. Is a woman representing knowledge seated in a chair. You can see her seated in a chair, supported on either side by goddess Cybele. Her garment is of four colors, representing four elements, her head being the color of fire, her bust that of air, her thighs that of earth, and legs that of water. How science and humanities have lived together for thousands of years or centuries have come out so well in this painting. Now, what we need in pursuit of human sciences is freedom and liberty. In Ideals of Education, Tagore in 1929 had focused on freedom and liberty when he said this. He said, what man needs is freedom of power in our language, freedom of imagination in our literature, freedom of soul in our religious creeds, and freedom of mind in our social environment, all of which will lead us to man's freedom of moral communion in the human world. Originally, this was given as a lecture in Tokyo, and this was published in Vishwabharati Quarterly. Now, what are these four keywords? Freedom of power, freedom of imagination, freedom of soul, and freedom of mind. These are crucial for cultural achievements and for cultivation of a knowledge in humanities. It is these free-thinking endeavors that are ingrained in the humanities. In the Indian tradition, this freedom is ensured. Why? Because the strength of classical Indian tradition, a few days ago I delivered a talk in the Central University of Karnataka on the issue of classicality of human languages. Some of you might have been there. The strength of classical Indian tradition, where ideas and scholarships came from all over the space and from the remotest corners and peripheries, because remember, Panini comes from remote areas of Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Our Gandhari also comes from Kandahar, Afghanistan. And we had Chitrangada of Arjun Chitrangada fame, who is coming from Manipur. We had Shankaracharya coming from down south to the greatest scholarship in Sanskrit research. So, remotest corners and peripheries, we were never walled as a culture. Tagore observes the following about the Western culture. He says, the civilization of ancient Greece was nurtured within city walls. In fact, all the modern civilizations in the West have their cradle of brick and mortar. What do? These walls leave their mark deep in the minds of men. They set up a principle of divide and rule in our mental outlook, which begets in us a habit of securing all our conquests by fortifying them and separating them from one another. We divide nation and nation, knowledge and knowledge, man and nature. And that's the big problem. Now I have two more slides to talk about humanities in the future. Remember, when I'm talking about this point of Tagore of division, we are not really in humanities into proposing patents and copyrights. In fact, as somebody said, we are into a copyleft tradition. What is a copyleft tradition? Those of you who are good with search engines and Google, you can easily type out and search what is copyleft. Copyleft says that take my story, take my poem, take my song, and take my painting. Do whatever you like. Change it, mend it, amend it, modify it, improve upon it, and alter it in a manner that becomes an alternative reality. That's very crucial. We are not talking about possessing things. Valmiki never said that I am the author of Ramayana and henceforth no one else shall copy. If he had said that, that would have been a horrible thing for India and Indian culture, because we are always believers in copyleft, not in copyright. Humanities in the future, to talk about this, most of our students will have not had just 2 or 3 different jobs by the time some of you will retire, but 2 or 3 different careers and transferable skills of humanistic studies. The most important point about humanities is this flexibility, adaptability, critical analysis, clear oral and written communication. All of these are solid preparation for an uncertain future. This is what Princeton University report says about humanities in the future. More penetratingly, the only long-term in-depth study of a large number of humanities graduates investigating 11,000 humanities alumni from Oxford University between 1963 and 1991. That study revealed that these people move dynamically into growth areas of the economy, with only 33% of them remaining in the same sector over their lifetime. So, journey is a typical feature of humanities. Last slide, looking back. Let us see how illuminations or new ideas came in ancient India. In ancient India, knowledge came through both Shruti and Smriti. What is Shruti? Meaning that which is heard. And what is Smriti? Recollections. So revelations and recollections, that is texts that are based on memory or tradition. The later texts explain, interpret, clarify the primary texts, the Puranas, the Manusmriti, the Arthashastra of Kautilya, Tantric treatises, etc., etc. So our tradition is a continuous tradition of commentaries of the texts. If you did not have Patanjali, nobody would have understood Panini. It is very important that our commentaries are given as much importance as our main texts. Similar dichotomies exist in the Tibetan tradition of Asia between the Kanjur and the Tanjur, commandments of Buddha and doctrinal teachings of others. These traditions should be highlighted and brought to light for the world audience. So I hope I have been able to give you some idea of what humanities is like and what kind of challenges lie for the students and researchers in humanities today and tomorrow. The most important thing is that be resilient, be adaptive, oriented towards change. If you do not stick to one place, one idea, one theory, in other sciences, people may say you are making a mistake. In humanities, nobody will say you are making a mistake. They say you are growing, you're evolving, you're changing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us. Now, we have with us Professor Kiran Devendra, HOD, Department of History, Amity School of Liberal Arts, Amity University, Haryana. Ma'am, आपका स्वागत है. Now, I would like to request ma'am to share her views.
Is she
Over to you,
around?
ma'am.
Is she around? Okay, none. Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. And I would like to begin with, congratulating Director Asla, Professor Jha, for having started these these webinars for the researchers. And I am also, feeling very good about his choice for choosing Professor UN Singh as the first person to give this webinar. He has with him a great experience, national and international, of languages and other areas. I would even say he was getting quite philosophical. And like the questions that are being raised now very frequently, that is, who am I, where will I go, and all those things, these are recent ones as well. Not only the older generations used to question these, but the younger writers and the younger scholars and the simple citizens are also beginning to think about these things. Now, I was listening to a lot many things, and I would say that it was daunting for me to have listened to the scholarly intellectual webinar of Professor Singh. I found it daunting because there were too many things in it, and he was trying to correlate again and again many things. And the slides that we were going through, they were also, quite heavy, and we had to focus on them, and we also had to listen to him at the same time. So maybe it is because of that that the mental burden was a little difficult to bear. Now, he also talked about Victor Hugo, and if those of us who have gone through the Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1830, he had predicted, in fact, he had discussed the fire in Notre Dame, and it happened 2-3 years back. And when I visited Paris this last year, it was so sad to see the Notre Dame going through the renovation. Initially, a lot of people had offered money to renovate it, but suddenly it has stopped. So that was another painful, I would say, as a student of history, a painful experience. But then those of us who have believed that history only discusses past, Victor Hugo is also a novelist who has also tried to talk about something that was to happen. His reference to the European Union, Professor Singh, if I am right, and if you are listening to me, I feel that we also at least with my students of history, we as history faculty, we try to bring our students to the latest, and we do need to now talk about Brexit as well, which has impacted the European Union. You were talking about Oxford scholars, you were talking about painters, and when we talk about, Oxford, it made me also nostalgic because the Bodleian Library has got a rich resource. And not only that, you must have seen yourself that it also tries to speak to us about the need to preserve history. And you have seen that even the smallest of part, which is at the highest level on the roof, is also so beautifully painted and always, given a feeling that the society has been caring about the tradition of preserving the past, which is carrying the scholars, the teachers and the students to a future. So there you must also have seen the, lot of, as you were saying, that, the issues are taken up, but they continue to be taken and new interpretations keep coming up. And same happened where, about Shakespeare discovering his dark lady in the sonnets. And there were researches after researches, and these were posted on the notice boards, that how one after the other these researches are going on. And you must also have seen the hairlock of, I think it was of Keats or Shelley, you would correct me. But whenever one becomes actually a student of humanities, social sciences, call it whatever you may, liberal arts, one is actually having an exposure to the past, to the future, to literature of the past, to the oral history, to the discussions which we have with people and scholars. And what I feel is that it is very, very important you try to touch upon it with your several examples of paintings, of scholars. And you brought in Tagore again and again, his beautiful self-portrait. I think some of the things were understood by me as well. But what I would feel is that if I found your lecture daunting because of the experience that you have, because of the knowledge that you have, the ease with which you could share with us, will the young scholars and the young faculty be able to actually understand the spirit of the lecture that you beautifully delivered. So I would let you know that it was very daunting for me, but I did try to make the sense of some of the beautiful things that you mentioned. And what I feel is that the researchers, yet I also liked the way you said about the paintings, that they can be, we need to not own our writings, and we need to pass it on, so that the scholars, the researchers, the accomplished professors, everyone has, or scholars, they have a chance to give it a new interpretation. And then there would be a group of scholars who would like to give another kind of, meaning to it. What one feels is that, as far as possible, as students and as researchers, as accomplished academicians, we all need to keep reading. We all need to keep watching films. Those of us who have been able to watch Selma, it is on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his march towards Selma. And it is so beautiful. Watching movies, seeing the paintings in museums and in galleries. If you remember, you were giving a lot of examples of the painters, and you showed that beautiful painting which you tried to interpret. I think you were reading it from somewhere, where Plato is there and so many others, Minerva, everyone. It was very beautiful. And those of us who have been able to see the roof paintings in the churches of Europe, and also in Leighton Hall, and also the works of Da Vinci, and so many others, we do find that they have a language, they have an interpretation, and people perceive it the way they see it. So different perceptions are always there, which you towards the end rightly pointed out, that nothing is wrong and nothing is right. We can go on a journey towards our future research. Thank you so much. And thank you, Professor Jha, Director Asla, for always giving me an opportunity to speak. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing word of wisdom with us today. Now, the floor is open for question and answer. Now, may I request Director Asla, Professor Sanjay Kumar Jha, to moderate the interactive session. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Dr. Supriya. And thank you, ma'am. And thank you, Professor Singh, for introducing us to a host of generic and specific terms of research from different areas of humanities, from philology to philosophy you talked about, then generative syntax to pragmatics, then fine arts to performing arts. You talked everything. And I feel this indeed was, an eye-opening session of learning new thoughts and ideas. So thank you, sir. So with that, the floor is now open for our researchers or prospective researchers as well. And they may ask whatever questions they have. What I can say in the chat box as well as question answer, maybe I can start with a question from Dr. Pallavi Berry. Yes. She's saying, in present times, I hope Professor Singh, you are able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
I can read this question.
Okay. Yes, so that's better. If you can read yourself, or if you wish, I can read for you.
So I can read and answer both.
Okay.
Pallavi is raised a very interesting point, and she's saying in present times, methodology has become central, and within that, quantitative study has been gaining immense significance.
Yeah.
But the present crisis has once again exposed the importance of literature-based research, qualitative analysis, and analysis within policy framework. How this change is expected to be welcomed by research in humanities? In fact, this is a very crucial question, and there is no doubt that for a long time in the recent period, I've been seeing more and more quantitative humanities and
Yeah.
more and more digital humanities, as they call it.
Yeah.
Now, Kiranji talked about this being daunting, but I always believe that unless I have a difficult thing to bite, I don't want to go back from a lecture without so many unsolved mysteries, which I can again go back and think about it and write. So the quantitative angles, I'm not denying their importance. They have their importance in biology, in biosciences, particularly in various COVID medicines that they are experiments that they are working on, and various other areas of engineering, science, and technology that they're working on. No doubt about that. Counting, quantifying, they have their importance. But the problem in counting in him that when somebody counts and does the text mining and counts in the literary text, how many times this particular kind of adverb has been used, how many times this has been done, how many times that has been done, I feel a bit uneasy about understanding that kind of research and how far it can lead you, because humanities is not necessarily against counting, but humanities cannot depend on, cannot just only counting. More than the counting, there is something more that has to be read. There are things which are in between two words, the silence, which Wittgenstein used to talk about. Lines between two lines. You have to find out the answers quite often from those corners. And that's what humanity makes humanities challenging, not just counting. It's an important thing. Now, Pallavi is right when she says that today's crisis, these days, the crisis had made us sit back and think once again whether we should definitely look at the quality once again. But I would say, Pallavi, that this is not only because of the crisis today. There is a whole school of thinking which has always been exploring new ideas in the area of qualitative research. Accepting that, I do not find a very good book on qualitative methodology available for our research students. The reason being that qualitative research is so new and so innovative. When somebody comes up with a tool such as deconstruction, looking at a text and talk about deconstruction, that's a new tool, new concept, new qualitative concept. And such concepts have been coming in the history of humanities research from time to time. And this is very crucial, that you don't have a fixed book which is prescribed in our course on qualitative humanities methodology. That is something perhaps we have to think about. I think this is very crucial hint for us from ASLA and MIT University Haryana, that on the qualitative methodology, there should be a good anthology which should come out. How do the historians look at things? How do the linguists look at things? How do the psychologists view their subject? This is something which is very crucial, where counting will take the back seat, but the qualitative research will take the front seat. And what are those tools and technologies that we can think of? Now, there is one more question which has come from Mahfouz Ahmad, and he's saying the relationship between human to human is decreasing day by day, whereas the relationship between human and electronic objects, it is increasing at a very fast pace. How the relation among human beings can be increased? This is very crucial. I don't know, those of you who have seen a film recently made called Upgrade, anyone has seen the film called Upgrade? If you haven't seen, please look at it. I'm actually very angry on the filmmaker, because toward the end, he shows that the digital technology has won over the human being, and the human being had no control over his actions. It's very crucial that we should not really give up. Technology, the important point about technology is, and the disruption in technological research, is that it will be so disruptive that it will take away your attention from your child, from your wife, from your husband, from your family, from your leisure, from all other activities towards a particular kind of technology. You are just then glued to that technology, and you forget that the essence in social cultural living is the man to man, or man to woman, or woman to woman, or multiple entities. Their interlocution, their relationship, that's very crucial. And that is something which needs to be understood. So this is something which is very interesting that he mentioned. Now, Vinod Kumar has mentioned, how far is it right to say that peace is established after war, which is always long lasting, as certain historical incidents witnessed it? See, to view it in a little different manner, since Janmashtami is coming, let me look at it from the Krishna's angle. The Arjuna is very scared of war. True. Karna is also scared of war, because he knows that at a crucial point of time. But then, because you're crucial, you're worried about war, you can't stop. Because if you have two different viewpoints, let me call them warring viewpoints, whether in humanities research or in running the country or ruling over the world, there will be clashes. In civilizational history is full of those clashes. But a lot of time, the clashes have really diminished our humanities. But at the same time, it has also given us a lot of wisdom. Because it has given a lot of wisdom, I won't welcome a third world war. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm only saying is that the peace that comes up after war definitely makes us much more wise. So the experiment of the United Nations, which failed before World War II, has changed drastically after the Second World War. Going by the same logic, you might say, sir, but the WHO has failed us today. in the COVID scenario, it is changing its stand every other day and giving us wrong directions. True, but then that organization is not the only organization we should talk about. What I'm saying is a lot of very interesting views, interesting points have come about after the World War II from various experiences, and these are experiences of war. Another person, Ruchika Sinha, is asking, I wanted to know if the research on humanities and its origin is European or we have an Indian origin also. I think I have already answered this question through my presentation by saying and pointing out that as much as Europeans have looked at or contributed to humanities research, huge amount of contribution has been made by the Indian argumentative tradition, Indian tradition of texts and commentaries. And I have given you many justifications of how and why this is something which is important.
Right.
Pradipta Vishwas is asking, is fine arts quantitative research is possible? Well, I really don't know. I have not really come across any study of quantitative analysis of fine artists. But then, a lot of people have viewed fine arts from geometrical angle, from architectural views, from the point of view of engineering, because a lot of artists today, particularly installation artists, I'm sure you know that. If you go to European countries, you'll see huge installations. Actually, many of them have been done by very capable Indian artists and Indian thinkers. Now, if you look at some of those installations, you will understand that it is very crucial as to what the shape and size and geometry and design and color scheme should be. And a lot of this is done now on digital mechanism before they're actually implemented on the ground. So a lot of people actually do. I had been interacting in Barcelona. I was interacting with a painter and a sculptor who was specialized in drawing and demonstrating and also exhibiting children's head. The pain that children suffer in the warlike situation, if you just have only the cut from head above the child, he created about 40 different sculpted images of children with different kind of feelings, which are all feelings came during the wartime. And it's very interesting, but then I also found that he was using a lot of digital mechanism to come about some of those images and the expression systems, which then he translated into his sculpted images. So it is possible to do some kind of merging, but still quantitative research in fine arts I haven't come across, because you need to have an artist with more than 3,000 paintings to be able to do quantitative analysis of his paintings. Now, even if you have 2,600 paintings at Tagore, the problem with that is that these are not of the same type. These are using different techniques. Some are using one technique, some are using another, some are using one medium, sometimes he's using another medium. You know, he was a man in a hurry. I have seen the originals, which you may not have seen, where on the back of an original, because he didn't have time to find a piece of paper or a canvas to paint, the back of a very great original, he's painted another original, which is equally great. Now, for the preserving people, those who are engaged in museum and museology and preservation, it's a great challenge for them. How do they preserve? Which color scheme do they main? Because you know, the same paper at the back of it, he has done that. So this is also very interesting point of view. So these are the questions which I have seen. And
I think a couple of questions are also there.
I'm looking at the now QA chat box.
Right.
In the QA chat box, Somdev Kar from IIT Ropar, he is asking this question: NEP to 2020 gives a lot of emphasis on humanity with the implementation of the new policy. I really don't want to comment on where the humanities will go after the new policy begins to be implemented, because it depends on who is implementing, when it is being implemented. It is only a document which has been accepted by the cabinet now. Now I guess it has to go through parliament. It has to become an act, and the real notifications have to come from the UGC, and then the changes will have to begin. But then it is right, you are absolutely right, because there is a lot of emphasis on human language, uh, focus on languages and focus on humanities. And we will have to see uh, how much of this will be actually true. That is, when the money matter comes, when this increased funding is, because both Kiranji and myself, we have worked in the government, we know how things change so quickly overnight. When actually one will sit down in the Planning Commission meetings to distribute money, at that point of time, it will depend. I mean, I can only give you, I can recollect my impression of the Planning Commission, because I have been member of the Planning Commission from 2 times, both from Culture Ministry as well as from the HRD Ministry. And I've seen what has happened in that. There was one proposal from the uh, business houses, representatives of our leadership in industry, to close down all departments of linguistics and all departments of Pali. And the deputy chairman looked at me and said, okay, Professor Singh, you are sitting next to this important leader of industry. What is your opinion? In fact, I has said that I can only take 5 minutes and I'll give you the answer. I gave my answer in 5 minutes. I can say, then I said that I can speak for some more time if you have time, but otherwise I can stop here. I was ultimately given half an hour time to defend this technique that I've used in argumentation, and that man did not know where to hide his face. Because it's an important thing to understand that how much importance humanities has, and I hope this will be done. Shraddhanvita has a question. For a few researchers, what would you like to recommend, qualitative or quantitative research? As research is not research anymore, if we see the current trend, the focus is just on publishing. I know. I can see the frustration that you have in this question, that there is a lot of emphasis on publishing in Scopus journals. And in humanities, as you know, some of our best journals do not care about Scopus. Indian linguistics, the best journal in linguistics, has nothing to do with Scopus. It is impossible to get your paper accepted in that journal. And that is the same in many, many other cases. But this rat race of publishing is something which has really created a huge setback. I would say that I don't think you should have an option of qualitative or quantitative. It depends on your area of research. If your area of research, suppose you're talking about impact of mass media, suppose you're talking about fake news, and you're talking about, recently the IIMC has come up with a very good, huge volume on fake news and a research on that. You can actually do a lot of quantitative research while working on such topics. So that's not something where you need to be either or situation. Dinesh Kumar is asking, sir, do you think dominant perception is important in research to begin with new ideas in humanities? Well, I don't know. I mean, if you want to act like Chomsky, then what you do is you create a straw man and you knock it off. It's called famous argumentation strategy. It's called the straw man strategy. Create a very strong straw man as if that is a dominant view. And then you just knock it off in one show with the lighting of matches. Chomsky does it very ably in aspects of theory of syntax. In many, many other people also have done in many other fields. But dominant perception is not always that you begin with. You can also begin with completely new perception. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Sunil Kumar has asked a question, is it fine arts really impact on the present generation to brighten their future in the mechanical life? I didn't understand this question. Is fine arts, what is the question? Is it fine arts really impact on the present generation to brighten their future in the mechanical life? I would, if I, whatever I have understood from this question, I would say that fine arts really gives you like music, music for therapy. Fine arts is also a great therapy. In fact, those of you who did not know would know that all the 33 tours that Tagore had made all over the world, first thing he would do as he will get off the ship is to go to an exhibition that is happening in the Louvre or wherever, whichever city. So it does give you a lot of relief. And does raise many questions in your mind, which you have not perhaps thought about even after reading a whole thesis, whole dissertation. Yes.
Can I come in
Yes.
once again?
Yes, yes, please, ma'am.
Professor Singh, since there have been questions on the research getting quantitative and the lot of publication being expected. Now what one feels is that we need to only go in for quantitative in case we have large samples. In case you are doing a study of 100, 200 cases, there's no need. But if you are doing a survey like NCRT, which is done on an annual, on a 5-year basis, you know about that, the National Education Survey. For that, of course, you will need, the apps like SPSS and many others. But we need to be very, very sure that now the trend has been that to the quantitative studies as well, the qualitative analysis and inputs are being added to give human touch to it. Now, another thing that we have all noticed is that every day a large number of cases are being reported. Numbers are given, so many deaths, so many deaths. You see, human lives have the loss of human lives has been reduced to numbers. For social scientists, for people, for scholars in humanities, for linguists, for painters, I don't think we need to go into numbers. It's very cruel to reduce life to a number. But as far as the scientists are concerned, the doctors are concerned, the druggists are concerned who have to go into making of vaccines and all, yes, for them the numbers are very important and crucial. And even if the impact studies, the efficacy of the studies has to be done, the numbers would be important. But as far as possible, what one feels is that if one has to force oneself to become trendy in getting quantitative, then I think the latest trend you must be knowing is the mixed method approach. And that gives much more value to a research study. And another thing that I wanted you to, address is my worry for several years is that shouldn't every subject have a method to do research according to its own parameters? How can a person of scholar of political science or anthropology be expected to follow a methodology which is of mathematics? How can we, the scholars, the fresh scholars, the accomplished scholars, and how can they be asked to follow a new trend which is only and only focusing on a method which the other subjects are following? I feel that social sciences and humanities, unless the sample sizes are large, we don't have to go into that, but into numbers. Another thing is there a way to reduce pedanticism in research? especially after you have done your PhD, because that, of course, is a must. But after that, you are an accomplished scholar. Would it be fair to expect a lot of, pedanticism, which requires a lot of energy, and it is a mechanical way of functioning as well? The text is much more important. What you write is much more important. Or are we all the time going to judge it pedantically? It has been my worry. Is there a way to simplify?
In fact,
Very nice, man. Yeah.
can I just very briefly let me respond to her. One is that if you look at George Abraham Grierson's research, where he has taken between 1901 to 1928, he has taken so many large number of languages and across the country, and he has gathered data. But then he did not really quantify the data and stop there. He actually commented on those data from a language science angle and went into the qualitative research. So that is one interesting example of how people do handle large things, but then their commentaries are a little different. Second important point is that you are absolutely right that each discipline has its own methodology. And interesting thing is, where it will become interesting is, can I use methodology of literature to study history? Can I use methodology of history to study politics, etc., etc.? But then I'm saying that, yes, I mean, political science will have its own methodology, history will have its own, linguistics will have its own, but then there are also possibilities across humanities disciplines to give and take their experience. Yeah, so that is the only thing that I wanted to modify this.
Very nice. So as you have heard that there will be, several factors which will determine whether your research will be qualitative or quantitative. So on these issues, definitely in our upcoming webinars, we'll be having, many, researchers who will enlighten you specifically, exclusively on quantitative aspects of humanities research. And all the questions were really very, very pertinent, like as Dr. or Mr. Pradipto Biswas also asked Professor Singh, that is there any possibility of quantifying data in fine arts? Of course, I think this question itself can be a matter of research. Maybe Professor Singh can motivate some of his students to go for this kind of research, like exploring the scope of quantifying data in what you call fine arts. Or it can also be very close to like architecture, where you have plenty of scope of doing quantitative analysis. So similarly, like Dr. Shraddhanvita, Dr. Shraddha, she herself is, I can say, her PhD research is completely based on quantitative analysis, and it's also very interdisciplinary. She has used her political competence in the domain of medical field. Maybe we can discuss more about it later on, but given the time constraint, I think we'll have to stop here. And thank you very much, all of you, for being part of this webinar. And we'll be meeting very soon, immediately after, I think, 15 days. We have another webinar, and that will be more focused on quantitative aspect. So this is my humble request to all of you to be part of those webinars. We will be having this kind of webinars for at least 3-4 months. This is what we have decided. So with these words, I will give the floor to Dr. Supriya.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor Hemant Kumar Jha, Coordinator, Department of English, to propose vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. In fact, everything has been spoken. Nothing has been left. And when we talk about research, there are innumerous questions, and questions. And in fact, research begins with a question. If you have a question, when you can think of the answers. For example, you can think of Newton. Sir Isaac Newton. Everybody knows that he had a question in his mind about the apple falling to the ground, and only then, he tried to find out the answer of the question. And then we have the famous law of gravitation, So this question, talking about the principles and practices of research can never conclude. It is endless, It will remain inconclusive. Okay, so with these words, I would like to, thank everybody, especially, for example, our Professor UN Singh sir. It was a highly scholarly, informative, and insightful talk. I have been, attending, the research seminars, every now and then, but it was really, informative, insightful, and a new perspective I've come across today. I would like to, thank especially for my director, Dr. Asla, for encouraging, always ready to, have such kind of program. And in fact, this kind of program is a learning experience for people like me also. I would like to go for more and more research, and in fact, this conflict between quantitative and qualitative will continue. I'm also, for example, I would like to sit down one day with Professor Singh, and would like to work on, the poetry of, research, on Tagore's poetry. And if we can see, if we can quantify, Tagore's poetry, if I would like to see, I'm waiting for that day. So thank you very much. I would like to thank, our dear Kiran ma'am, for, her. She is always ready with her original, reflections, observations, and, very, very important ideas. She is always ready to question. She never, resists for questioning, for example. She is always guiding force, behind all these programs. So thank you very much, Kiran ma'am. And I would like to, thank for all my participants, students, scholars, people who have asked questions, and because of the participants, this kind of program can become successful. I'm really thankful to our Supriya ma'am, because she has done a lot of things. In fact, I was really scared, when I got the information that I have to coordinate this work. I thought that of course I will not be able to do this, because in fact Supriya ma'am, she supported me, helped me, Supriya ma'am and Shraddha ma'am, and I like to thank the technical team, and I'm waiting for the next program. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody. Thank you everybody.
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू एवरीवन। और इसके साथ ही हम आज के इस प्रोग्राम को समाप्त करते हैं। सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।